Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Amanda Wilkie. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Hey, John. It's always great to chat with you. So I'm very happy to be here.
Amanda is one of our consultants here, and she specializes, among other things, in technology and process. And this topic here kind of blends those two together in a lot of ways, and that's building better solution requirements, right? You're a firm, you're sitting there and you are exploring or considering kind of adapting a new technology, a new software, something like that. What's the process you go through? What's the framework you go through? What considerations should you have to make sure you're making the right choice? So my first question to you, Amanda, is why is it important for firms to really start to develop a process and to really understand how to develop better solution requirements for their technology projects?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons, John, and I'll tell you what typically happens sometimes. We have a pain point. We realize that an application isn't working for us anymore, or we need a new application. And many times, John, people will pick up the phone, they'll call us and they'll say, hey, what are the top 3 workflow solutions we should look at? What are the top 3 time and billing solutions we should look at? And that's really the wrong way to go about it, because when you do that, when you start with the solution first and then work back to the requirements, you can really miss out on really meeting the need that the firm has, meeting the need that you have. So a few of the reasons to really start with the requirements is it'll help make sure that you're in alignment. Not just, it's not just an IT initiative. It's not just a firm leadership initiative. You want to make sure that leadership, that IT, and really the end users, the users of the technology, that they are all in consensus of what the problem is that the technology is actually trying to solve. So that's one reason that you want to really build requirements first. The next is, budgeting and timelines. If you really spend the time preparing your solution requirements, that's going to give you some more information about, what type of estimated timeline, how long is this going to take, how much is this going to cost. It's going to help let those things fall in line first, but you also don't want those things to impact, again, the solution that you choose. You don't want to be hurried to select something because tax season's coming up and we really need this in place beforehand, or, well, we only have X number of dollars budgeted for this. So, let's look at the solutions that are in our price range. Of course, those things are important, but you really want the selection of the solution to be driven by your requirements, not things like budget and timeline. And then overall, John, when we talk about process, it's all about efficiency. So defining your requirements from the very beginning means that when you start talking to solution providers and they start doing demos, they won't really waste your time, doing a huge sales pitch. They can really, really focus on the core functionality that you're looking for. And then that way you can kind of look for a lot of the added value things, making sure that your firm's vision is in alignment with the solution provider vision, making sure that you understand their long-term roadmap, and again, making sure that it's going to really fit your firm and not just solve the one problem that you have, but these people can become a true partner for you. So John, those 3 things, having the alignment throughout the firm, making sure that, yes, budget and timelines are important, but you really want the selection to be driven by the requirements, and also just having an efficient process so that you can focus on what's really important to you and what's really important to the firm, opposed to wasting a lot of time looking at bells and whistles and demos that don't add a lot of value to the process or to the solution in the end.
That's excellent advice, Amanda. And, it kind of makes you think of the phrase slow down and go fast. And I would even argue, I mean, I love that phrase, but what you're talking about here is actually just going fast as well. I mean, it's going fast because some people think in this process, let's get to the demo phase. The sooner we get to the demo phase, the better. And
Mhm.
we've all been a part of projects where wasted demos that completely miss the mark. Um, Demos is where we discover how not aligned we are internally. So I love all of your advice there, and I've seen that to be true
Yeah.
as
And John,
well.
it's really easy to get out of scope during those demos. You've identified, again, you identified a problem, you're looking for a solution. In this case, we're talking about applications. And without those requirements, it's really easy to look at a solution and say, oh, this will do 10 times more than what we were looking for. It's also going to be 10 times as complex. It's going to take 10 times longer to implement those things. So having those requirements really lets you hone in and look for a solution that's going to meet your needs and the needs that that you have developed for the firm.
So, what's your advice, Amanda, on how firms should approach, kind of in a little more detail, uncovering their solution requirements? What's your
Yeah.
tips there?
Well, first and foremost, you want to look at the team you have that's going to create these requirements. Again, these things do not need to be IT decisions. They also don't need to be firm leadership who went to a conference, saw a great demo, and comes back and says, hey, IT leader, I need you to go ahead and implement this technology. You really want the requirements to be built by a cross-functional team. Again, your IT leaders, firm leadership so that you have their support, as well as a cross-functional team of people who are going to use this solution. Sometimes it's even good to get folks who might not be, you might not think are going to use this solution. Something that comes to mind is if you're looking for a workflow solution for tax, that's your primary focus. Still include someone from audit to help build those requirements because they're going to give you a perspective and possibly have some ideas of ways that you can use the solution down the road. So you're not just looking at how do we solve this one problem, but make sure that we're solving problems for the entire firm, even if when you prioritize the solution or prioritize implementation, it may be phased. Does that make sense, John? Did I make that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cross-functional team is really crucial for all the reasons you listed. Can you speak to some of the roles within the team? Because some of the um, it's not just necessarily a committee just like getting there and just voting, right? There's some functions, there's some roles there. Any key roles you want to highlight?
Yeah. And this really comes from some of the process consulting that we do. When we build those teams, you really want that champion of the team. So you want someone, again, that is a high level leader in the firm, someone we like to say that's going to be able to remove roadblocks, but also make sure that they can build buy-in throughout leadership. Then you want someone who's going to be a team leader. So someone who's really going to drive the whole process and take ownership of the process. And then everyone else is that cross-functional team. And so they're going to be providing input. You want them to be kind of the leaders in their area. You want them to, to be the ones who are going to speak freely and represent their areas throughout the firm. So that's a little bit about the team, but John, I want to circle back. You asked for some additional tips. Unless you have another question, you want some more tips on how to go about building these requirements?
Yeah, and maybe what some of those requirements should be.
Yeah. So a couple other things you want to keep in mind is, the high level business goals of the firm. What is this technology expected to do? Is it supposed to, or how is it supposed to impact, your internal clients, so your staff, as well as your external clients? So you want to keep those, the business goals and the short-term and long-term business goals, and make sure that the solution really adheres and supports those things. Then you want those user requirements. So what exactly do you want this application to do? I think of those as more of the features. So from an end user standpoint, again, what do you really want it to do? But something that's very important are also the functional requirements. Things like the integration, the access to the data. Again, that's why you want that cross-functional team, because folks from IT may have some insight to some of those functional requirements. The people who use the application in and out every day, they may not, they may just not think of those things first. So, look at the high-level business goals. You want to look at the features of what you actually want it to do, but then the functionality as well. And that's going to kind of get you a good foundation of those requirements. Another tip, John, is make sure that you prioritize those requirements. There may be some things that are nice to haves, and you want to make sure that those are considered, but you also want to make sure when you're making that final decision that your go, no-go decision isn't based on one of those things that would be nice to have. I'll give you an example of, many times we like to white label some of our solutions so that when the client goes to that website or goes to use that solution, it is branded with the firm's colors and logos and things like that. That is a great nice to have. Some firms would call that a hard requirement. But if it's not a hard requirement for your firm, you don't want that final decision of whether or not to go with this solution to come down to one of those requirements that isn't really that important to the firm. It's not huge on that feature functionality list.
That's great, Amanda. One requirement I've heard you talk about before, and maybe requirement isn't the best word, but really exploring as a group the key audiences that are affected by the solution. And so it's real quick to kind of list out the people sitting in the room, right? We have a tax person, we have an audit person, okay, tax, audit. But there's also, the internal and external components. There's other key audiences internally that the firm should probably be considering. And then externally, I think it's always good to say, how will this affect our clients? So anything you would add to that, Amanda?
Oh, absolutely. And if you're not thinking about how things will impact your clients, then you're definitely going about this all wrong, because that should be a question from the beginning, because you want to make sure that it is positively impacting your clients, and any change that's going to impact your clients, you want to make sure that you're ahead of that. So it may mean communication, it may mean marketing to your clients. That is huge. And starting with these requirements and keeping those audiences in mind, like you said, John, keeping them in mind from the very beginning will make sure that it's a positive change and it's a much easier implementation, not only from a firm perspective, but from an external client perspective as well.
That's great. And, Amanda, you work with a lot of different firms on pretty significantly sized projects, right? Not always the easiest projects to manage or to lead. And you have helped firms in this area a lot. And firms that have done a great job on the front end of really understanding their requirements before they dive into demos or choosing a solution. Any success, examples or stories you can share of firms that have done this right, and maybe some of the results they've received from that?
Yeah, well, it may be easier to share some of the pain points and things that you want to avoid. I mentioned the scope creep. I've seen that happen with firms where we go in, we start looking for a solution, we've built the requirements, and then we get to the demos and people say, okay, well, this solution is not only going to replace, we'll say, my time and billing, it's also going to replace my workflow. Well, again, we didn't have those conversations about workflow. So if you start throwing solutions out there that now replace two things, you might upset the apple cart, and you don't have the buy-in throughout the firm to really make that successful. So doing this can help. Building requirements from the beginning can help control that scope creep. I'd say also firms sometimes forget to re-examine the solutions that they already have in place. Many times we have one problem, we go out and we find a solution to that one problem. That application may have functionality to address 10 other problems that we have, but then another problem comes up and we look for something else to address that problem. So make sure that you look at the solutions that you have in-house. I'll use the same example. Talk to firms, they want to look for workflow solutions. They've just implemented a new time and billing system. The time and billing system may actually support some functionalities of workflow as well. So make sure that when you are evaluating solutions, you are actually considering what you already have, also what you already have in place. And doing that, that's when we then get to some of those success stories, Jon, where people have the buy-in from the very beginning. Everyone understands what the scope is. So you don't go into those demos getting sold on all the bells and whistles. You can actually talk about the functionality that is important to your firm. And spoiler alert, Jon, here, a lot of that functionality are things like the integration, the access to data. You're not looking at, how does this click work in this application and that click work in that application. So again, building these requirements from the very beginning allow you to really focus and hone in on what you need and what the firm needs, so that you can actually make that decision with more confidence and start with buy-in from the very beginning. Just like you said, Jon, it's really kind of slowing down to speed up.
So Amanda, one thing we do on this podcast every episode is we like to ask the question related to the topic that we're talking about, of what's going on outside the profession, what's going on outside the accounting profession that we just need to understand that is maybe influencing how we are doing things or should be doing things as it relates to this topic. So as you think about building better solution requirements and all the new technologies that are coming in and things of that sort, what's your perspective on what's going on outside the accounting profession?
Yeah, I think every profession is really looking for ways to, build better solutions. You're also starting to see that there are solution providers, from outside of the accounting profession that are looking for opportunities to help accounting firms. Solutions that come from, say, the legal vertical, so on and so forth. But if you really have your requirements, then you can look at these solutions and again, start to evaluate them, not necessarily based on their experience in the profession. That's always great to have, but there are a lot of great opportunities that if you have solid requirements, then you're looking at the solution, not, those bells and whistles, not necessarily, what the application, what the fluff stuff, if you will. You want to make sure that solution, whether it is designed for the accounting profession or designed for another profession, that it's meeting the requirements that you have built and the scope that you have built.
So Amanda, if someone's listening to this podcast, and as we close out our conversation here, maybe they have a project on the horizon that they're listening to this episode and they're thinking, wow, this is meeting me right where I am. What's your advice for them on next steps?
Yeah. Again, I'd get that cross-functional team together first. John, like you said, we have helped many firms through this process. So sometimes having that external facilitator, someone who can guide you through the process and build those requirements, sometimes that is helpful. But I always would say start with that cross-functional team and start defining again, kind of those high level goals, the features, the functionality, those things, and get everyone on the same page. And then move forward. And that's going to make sure that you have that alignment that you need to make any implementation, any large implementation, especially. It's going to start you on a path to make sure that that is successful.
Excellent advice, Amanda. And you just distilled for me and our listeners, many years of experience in about 15 minutes. So thank you for that. And Amanda, as always, thank you for being on the Boomer Briefing podcast.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
And for our listeners, if you like these topics, please subscribe. We release new episodes every Tuesday. So please stay tuned for the next episode next Tuesday morning. Thanks so much.